The chamber of the Galactic Council was a hemisphere of polished stone and shifting light, its curved walls lined with delegations from 63 species. The air carried the scent of alien oxygen mixes and the subsonic hum of translation matrices. At the center, upon a raised dais, Earth's ambassador stood alone. Adrian Holt wore the uniform of the United Sol Diplomatic Corps, simple gray fabric, no medals, no decorative braid. He was a man of average height, dark hair touched with white at the temples, hands folded behind his back. To the Velari delegation, which dominated the military caucus, he resembled a prey creature holding itself very still. Senior Speaker Ryland towered above his own console, his copper-scaled crest flared with amusement. His voice translated into Holt's earpiece as warm and patronizing. Ambassador Holt, your species has submitted petition number 382 for associate membership. We've reviewed your vessels, agricultural freighters, a handful of exploration cutters, one spheroid research station that can't even break light speed without vector assistance. You asked to join the interstellar community. For what purpose, exactly? Cultural enrichment. A ripple of vocalization, not quite laughter, moved through the council tiers. Holt's expression remained pleasant. We seek cooperation, Speaker, trade, scientific exchange, the same things every peaceful species seeks. Peaceful, Ryland repeated, tasting the word. A diplomatic term for defenseless. The Velari security assessment rates your entire system's naval projection as negligible. You have no warship tonnage worth classifying. He tapped a claw against his display. The motion before this council is not merely rejection. It is quarantine. Earth will be restricted to its home system until such time as a protectorate species can guarantee its security. I will be candid, we are that species. Holt did not flinch. Several junior delegates expected him to sweat, to tremble. He did neither. You intend to make Earth a client world. We intend, Ryland said, to prevent your extinction. You're welcome. The senior speaker gestured to the council's voting matrix. Lights began to pulse across the chamber, a cascade of amber ascent scrolling toward an overwhelming majority. The motion would pass in minutes. Then the lights flickered. It was subtle, a half-second dim, a brief crackle in the environmental stabilizers. No one spoke. The Velari tactical liaison stiffened at his station, his head crest flattened. Speaker, the liaison said, his voice suddenly stripped of protocol. Our outsystem net has detected a mass shadow translating into real space, bearing directly on the council world. Ryland's head swiveled. Mass shadow, identify. Unknown, not council registry, not any known signature in the archive. The liaison's claws flew across his console, his scales paled. Great Rift, the displacement wake alone is larger than a dreadnought. I'm reading a physical length of he stopped, blinked, recalibrated. 7,000 meters, confirmed. Single object, artificial, moving at sublight intercept velocity. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted over one another. Alarms began pulsing in the military wing. Ryland slammed a fist against his console, and the noise subsided enough for him to round on the human ambassador. What is this, Holt? Did your people plan some sort of demonstration? Adrian Holt had not moved. His expression had not changed. But something in his posture shifted, a subtle ease, as if a long-held tension had finally been released. No demonstration, Speaker. I believe that's the Titan. Ryland's crest quivered. Titan. Holt turned his head slightly, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. The chamber's massive central display switched to an external feed, and every delegate saw it. A silhouette eclipsing the distant star, angular and brutal, a wedge of armor plating and drive vanes large enough to swallow small moons. It was still 10 light minutes out and already dominating the sky. The TSS Titan, Holt said, Titan class. The council chamber fell into a silence so deep that the hum of the life support became deafening. The voting matrix froze mid-count. Ryland's voice dropped to a cold, dangerous register. "You did not mention this ship in your petition." "You didn't ask," Holt replied. "And to be fair, you seemed very interested in our cargo ships." On the display, the Titan continued its approach. Running lights flickered along its spine, not weapons, not yet, but every tactical officer in the room already understood that a vessel of that size didn't need to show its teeth to be a threat. The mass displacement alone would destabilize the orbit of the defense platforms if it came too close. "Order it to halt," Ryland commanded. Holt inclined his head. "I'm not its commander, but I can relay the request, if you'd like." The speaker's claws dug grooves into his console. The motion to quarantine Earth hung in the air, now absurdly irrelevant. The Titan kept coming. The defense fleet scrambled with the frantic energy of a hive kicked open. 27 Velari cruisers peeled away from their orbital anchorages, weapon spines extending, targeting solutions painting the incoming vessel with invisible light. The Council world's planetary defense grid, 16 massive rail batteries embedded in mountain ranges, powered up with a subsonic groan that citizens in the capital could feel through the soles of their feet. Senior Speaker Ryland had moved to the military command alcove, surrounded by a storm of data projections. The Titan was now 8 light minutes out and decelerating with a stately, contemptuous grace. Its engine signature didn't match any known propulsion theory. The thermal plume alone should have been visible to the naked eye, but the ship appeared wrapped in some form of thermal suppression that broke every rule of heat exchange physics. "Analysis," Ryland snapped. The tactical liaison, whose name was Thren, had lost all color in his crest. "Armor composition unknown. Density readings suggest layered composite far beyond our penetrative scanning. I'm detecting possible weapon hardpoints, but the geometry doesn't match any convention. These are not turrets, Speaker. These are ports, casements, things that open." "How many?" "At least 40 major emplacements on the visible face. If the dorsal array is mirrored," Thren swallowed. 70 to 80 primary weapons, and that's assuming we're reading them correctly. The power core is giving us false returns, cycling through multiple signatures. They're masking its true output." Ryland's jaw tightened. "They're protecting us from knowing what it can do." On the main council floor, Adrian Holt had not moved from his position on the dais. Around him, delegates had pressed back against their seating, as if distance could protect them from the thing sliding into their sky. The ambassador's calm had become its own form of psychological pressure. Several counselors found it more disturbing than if he had started screaming demands. The Titan broadcast a standard IFF handshake. The Council's automated systems accepted it after a tense verification cycle, and a voice, female, unhurried, filled the chamber's comms. "Council Defense Command, this is Captain Myra Voss, Terran Ship Titan. We are on approach vector Delta 7. No hostile intent declared. We are here at the invitation of Ambassador Holt. Request permission to enter high orbit." Ryland seized the channel. "Captain Voss, you will cut your drives and hold position at 15 light minutes. Any further approach will be considered an act of aggression against the sovereign territory of the Galactic Council." A pause, 2 seconds, 3. "Speaker Ryland," Voss replied, and her tone was patient in the way a glacier was patient. "The Titan masses more than your entire home fleet combined. If we meant aggression, you would already be occupied by salvage teams. I'm going to enter high orbit now. The ambassador has a gift for you, and the council is going to want to see it." The channel closed. Thren looked up from his display, crest flat against his skull. "She's not slowing." The cruisers opened fire. Not on the Titan. No commander was that suicidal but warning shots. High-energy plasma bolts that carved brilliant arcs across the bow of the human vessel. They splashed against the Titan's forward shields with less effect than candle flames against a blast door. The shields didn't even flicker. They simply absorbed the energy, and a moment later, vented it harmlessly into space as a soft wash of infrared light. They just dissipated full-yield plasma, Thren whispered. That's not possible. Ryland turned to stare at Holt, who had resumed his earlier stance, hands behind his back, weight evenly balanced. The human wasn't watching the display. He was watching the council, watching Ryland. "What is this ship?" Ryland demanded. "What is it built for?" Holt met his gaze. Exploration, diplomacy, and the occasional polite reminder that we are not what your assessment files say we are. The Titan slid into high orbit above the council capital, and the view from the chamber's observation dome stole the breath from every being present. 7 kilometers of angled hull, dark as cooled iron, bristling with geometries that seemed to shift when you looked at them too long. Emitters and projectors studded its surface like the compound eyes of a god. It hung there, absolutely silent, eclipsing the local star and plunging the city into an artificial twilight. The Council's military caucus, which had spent 3 centuries certain of its supremacy, found itself staring up at something that made their finest engineering look like ocean-going galleys next to a fusion-powered carrier. Ryland's voice when he found it was hoarse. "You said a gift." Holt nodded. "The Titan has something for the Council, something we think will change the nature of our conversation." On the display, the forward section of the human warship began to open. Armor plates the size of city blocks slid apart with mechanical precision, revealing a cavernous internal bay. Light spilled from within, brilliant, pulsing, alive. The temperature readings inside the council chamber jumped 2 degrees simply from the radiative bleed. Ryland's crest lifted. "What is that?" Holt stepped forward for the first time, walking to the edge of the dais. "A stellar forge," he said, "capable of reigniting dead suns or providing clean, limitless energy to an entire sector for 10,000 years. It's a down payment on friendship, if you'll have it." The council was no longer trembling in fear of destruction. They were trembling because they had just realized how utterly they had misjudged the quiet species from the little blue world, and what that misjudgment might have cost them if humanity had been anything less than what it was. The stellar forge burned in its containment cradle like a captured piece of creation. The council's chief scientific advisor, an elderly Thelvian with translucent skin and 6 slender arms, was already weeping openly. His species had spent 900 years trying to solve the entropy cascade that made long-duration fusion unsustainable. The Titan had delivered the solution gift-wrapped in a magnetic bottle. Senior Speaker Ryland had not wept. His copper crest remained rigid, his posture martial, but his voice had lost its earlier condescension and acquired a brittle edge. "You bring a doomsday weapon into our home system, park it above our capital and call it generosity," he said, packing the military alcove. The main chamber had emptied into emergency session clusters. The voting matrix had been suspended indefinitely. "This is psychological warfare. You want us to feel indebted and terrified in the same breath." Adrian Holt had been granted a seat at the edge of the tactical table. He did not lean back in it. "What I want, Speaker, is for the Council to stop thinking of Earth as a charity case. The forge is genuine. Our engineers will train your teams to operate it. No backdoors, no hidden triggers. If the Council votes to accept associate membership, the forge becomes permanent infrastructure. If not, the Titan takes it home and we part ways with no hard feelings." Ryland's laugh was a dry, percussive rattle. "No hard feelings. You arrived with a warship that outmasses our combined fleets. You rendered our defense grid obsolete with a single shield vent. There will be hard feelings regardless." "Then I'd rather those feelings be respect than resentment." Holt leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Let me tell you about the Titan class. You're going to hear it eventually. I'd prefer you heard it from me." The alcove's other occupants, Thren, 2 Velari admirals, a civilian security minister from the Thelvian bloc, exchanged glances. Ryland gave a curt nod. Holt spoke. His tone was not boasting. It was the flat, factual cadence of an after-action report. The Titan was laid down 31 years ago in the orbital yards of Proxima Centauri. She's one of 12 vessels in her class, but the only one currently assigned to the Council's region of space. Her primary mission profile is not exploration, and it is not diplomacy. Those are secondary. What is her primary mission? Asked one of the Velari admirals, a scarred veteran named Corsus. Extermination. The word landed like a physical blow. Corsus's hand drifted toward a sidearm that wasn't there. Thren stopped breathing for a moment. Holt continued. For the last century, humanity has been fighting a war on the outer fringe of the Orion Arm. You've never heard about it because we made sure you wouldn't. The enemy is a species, if you can call it a species. We've designated the Dihur. They're a migratory swarm intelligence that consumes planetary biospheres. They've eaten 11 civilizations that we know of. They reached our frontier 87 years ago. We've been pushing them back ever since. Ryland's crest had flattened completely. You're saying your people have fought an interstellar war for nearly a century, and we detected nothing. No distress calls, no battle debris, no refugee convoys. No distress calls because we never asked for help. No battle debris because we recycle everything. No refugees because we don't run. Holt's gaze was steady. The Titan class exists to destroy Dihur hive ships. The forge in its hold is a byproduct of the star ignition technology we developed as a weapon. We realized it could also give life, so we're offering it to you. Silence filled the alcove, the kind of silence that rearranges a person's understanding of the universe. Corsus spoke first. His voice had lost its military crispness. How many Dihur have you killed? The swarm that hit our frontier numbered approximately 4 billion individual bioships. We've reduced that to an estimated 200 million. The war is not over, but we're winning. And you did this alone. We did this, Holt said, while you were debating whether we were worth protecting. Ryland turned away. His shoulders, always so square, had dropped a fraction. The senior speaker who had minutes ago moved to make Earth a client world now faced the crushing weight of a revelation that rewrote the entire strategic balance of known space. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was the shield his people had never known they needed. Before anyone could formulate a response, the alcove's emergency comm panel flared an urgent crimson. A priority signal, routed through the Titan itself, pierced the Council's network with an override code that ignored every security protocol in place. Captain Voss's voice cut through. Ambassador Holt, Speaker Ryland, we've just received a deep space telemetry pulse from the Orion Gap perimeter. It's a distress beacon, Velari colonial signature, and there's a mass shadow behind it. Thren's display lit up with the data feed. His crest went white. Speaker, he said, the shadow profile matches the Dihur signatures Ambassador Holt just described. Estimated arrival at the colony, 4 hours. Ryland stared at the projection. The colony of Veltorak was home to 12 million Velari civilians. Its defense garrison consisted of 6 patrol cutters and a single aging battle cruiser. Holt was already on his feet. Captain Voss, what's your intercept time? At maximum military thrust, we can be there in 1 hour, 47 minutes. The Titan is ready. Say the word, Ambassador. Holt looked at Ryland. The word isn't mine to give, Speaker. Veltorak is your world, your people. But if you want our help, it's already on the way. Ryland's crest rose. His voice cracked on the first syllable before he forced it steady. Go, please, go. The Titan's drives ignited, and the sky above the Council capital turned to fire. The Titan tore through the void at velocities that violated the Council's best understanding of inertial compensation. Inside the ship, Captain Myra Voss stood on her command deck, a circular space dominated by a single holographic tank that rendered local space in razor-sharp fidelity, and watched the Dihur bioships resolve into view. They were ugly things. Biological starfaring organisms the size of small moons. their outer membranes crusted with absorbed debris and the skeletal remnants of conquered vessels. They moved in clusters of 3 to 12, pulsing with a sickly green bioluminescence that her tactical officer had flagged as a quantum entanglement communication web. Kill one and the rest adapted. Ignore them and they multiplied. Time to contact 4 minutes, her navigation officer said. Colony evacuation is at 18%. Their defense garrison is already gone. The battlecruiser Veil Corps rammed the lead bioship to buy time. No survivors. Voss closed her eyes for a half-second. She never met the captain of the Veil Corps. She still felt the loss. Weapons, she said. Status on the primary arrays. Singularity anchors charged and spooling. Temporal shear cannons at 80% and climbing. The main gun is cold. Do you want me to spin it up? No, we're not fighting the whole swarm, just a forward tendril. Keep the main gun off the table. Let's show the Council what a Titan class looks like on half power. The tactical officer, a lean woman with a shaved head and a voice like smoked glass, allowed herself a thin smile. Half power it is. On the Council world, the chamber had transformed into a war room. Every display was tied to the Titan's external feeds, an unprecedented data-sharing gesture that spoke louder than any speech. Delegates watched in stunned silence as the human warship closed to engagement range. The D'Huer bioships detected the Titan and reacted with the furious, hungry aggression of a predator recognizing an old enemy. They launched spore clouds, organic torpedoes that could strip a planet's atmosphere, and extruded grapple tendrils designed to latch onto hulls and burrow through armor. The Titan didn't evade. It didn't need to. Voss gave a single command: anchors, ripple fire. 40 emplacements along the Titan's spine opened simultaneously. They didn't launch projectiles. They launched points of crushed spacetime, micro-singularities wrapped in containment fields that collapsed only after burrowing deep inside their targets. The D'Huer bioships didn't explode. They imploded, folding inward with wet, shuddering convulsions as their own biology turned against them. Within 20 seconds, the lead cluster of 6 bioships had been reduced to compressed spheres of organic matter, no larger than atmospheric shuttles. The Council chamber was silent. Thren, the tactical liaison, had stopped updating his readout. There was nothing to update. The engagement was already over before it had begun, and the Titan had barely warmed its systems. But the D'Huer were not finished. A second wave of bioships, larger and more heavily armored, emerged from the shadow of the gas giant that dominated the system's outer belt. At their center rode a command form, a rare, towering organism that served as the neural hub for the entire tendril. Its presence explained the colony's distress signal. This was a targeted assault, not random feeding. Voss studied the command form and felt a cold, professional anger settle into her chest. She fought its kind before, in the black gulfs beyond Far Reach and New Brisbane. She'd lost friends to them. Tactical, she said, I want the command form isolated. Sheer cannons, focus salvo, take the brain and the body follows. Understood, firing solution locked. What happened next would be replayed in Council archives for the next 1,000 years. The Titan's sheer cannons, weapons that operated by creating localized fractures in the fabric of spacetime, discharged in a synchronized burst. The effect was not light or fire. It was a wrongness in the visual feed, a stretch-and-tear that the Council's displays struggled to render. The command form didn't scream. It simply came apart, its molecular structure separating along fault lines that had not existed a nanosecond earlier. The remaining bioships, severed from their controlling intelligence, drifted aimlessly. The Titan finished them with precise, almost gentle anchor strikes. The battle was over. Duration, 4 minutes 12 seconds. Civilian casualties at Veltorak, 0 from the D'Huer incursion. The evacuation had not even finished before the threat was eliminated. On the command deck, Voss leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a single deep breath. Then she opened a channel to the council. Speaker Rylan, the colony is secure. We'll remain on station for the next 72 hours to ensure no stragglers. The Titan's medical bays are standing by to assist with any wounded. You have our condolences for the crew of the Veil Corps. They died with more courage than most. In the council chamber, Rylan received the message. His crest was neither flattened in fear nor raised in defiance. It was at rest, the posture of a warrior who had just watched a force of nature incarnate fight on his behalf and had no vocabulary left to process it. He turned to Adrian Holt, who had remained at the tactical table throughout the engagement, watching his own species do what they did best. "You could have destroyed us at any point in the last 300 years, Rylan said. Why didn't you? Holt's reply was simple. Because that's not who we want to be. The war with the Dehooer taught us what we're capable of when we have to be. It also taught us that being capable doesn't mean we have to become them. We chose a different path. We're offering it to you." The senior speaker of the Galactic Council, who had begun the day preparing to subjugate an entire species, bowed his head. "What would you ask of us in return?" Holt stood and offered his hand, an old human gesture that Rylan, after a moment's hesitation, mirrored with his own clawed grip. "Join the Shield Compact. Fight beside us. Not as subjects, not as protectorates, as equals. The Dehooer are still out there and they're learning. We need allies, not dependencies." Rylan's grip tightened. "The Council will vote. I cannot promise unanimity." "I'm not asking for unanimity. I'm asking for a start." Above the capital, the Titan drifted in its new orbital holding patterned, scarred bioship remnants cooling in the void behind it. The ship's running lights pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, a heartbeat broadcast across the darkness. It was no longer a threat. It was a promise. The Council, which had trembled in fear when the Titan-class warship first appeared, now found itself trembling for an entirely different reason. They were afraid of losing the best ally they'd ever almost thrown away. The emergency session reconvened 12 hours after the Battle of Veltorak. The council chamber had been reconfigured, not physically, but atmospherically. The human delegation, once relegated to a peripheral observation box, now occupied a central diplomatic suite flanked by the flags of 23 species who had requested immediate bilateral talks. The motion to quarantine Earth had been withdrawn by its own sponsors before the lights had even finished cycling back to full power. Adrian Holt stood at the suite's main table, reviewing data slates, when the door chimed and senior speaker Rylan entered alone. The Velari leader's body language had transformed. The arrogance was gone, stripped away by 4 minutes of combat footage. What remained was something rawer, a leader grappling with the collapse of his civilization's foundational assumptions. "May I speak candidly?" Rylan asked. Holt gestured to a seat. "I'd prefer it." Rylan sat, but his posture was rigid, his claws resting flat on the table as if he needed to anchor himself. Before your ship arrived, the Velari Security Council had already drafted a contingency plan. In the event that Earth's membership petition was rejected, we intended to deploy a pacification fleet. 5 cruisers, 2 troop carriers. They would have arrived at your homeworld within 6 standard months. Holt's expression didn't change. "I'm aware." Rylan's crest twitched. "You knew. We've been monitoring your encrypted military channels for 7 years. The pacification fleet's departure orders were drafted. They were never transmitted because your strategic command was waiting for the council vote. If that vote had gone through, Holt let the sentence hang. Then what? Then the Titan would have intercepted the fleet before it reached Sol, not to destroy it, to board the flagship, disable its weapons, and have a very direct conversation with the admiral in charge. The outcome would have been the same, just with more hurt feelings. Rylan stared at him. The Velari species had evolved from apex predators on a world of high gravity and constant volcanic upheaval. He had been raised to believe that strength meant the ability to dominate. Sitting across from this soft-skinned, unassuming human who spoke of intercepting his finest warships as if discussing dinner reservations, he understood for the first time that strength could also mean restraint on a scale that bordered on the sacred. "Why didn't you expose us?" Rylan asked. "You could have broadcast our plans to the council. You could have used it as justification to humiliate us, to demand concessions. Instead, you brought a gift. Because exposing you would have made you an enemy. We don't need enemies, Speaker. We have enough of those already. What we need are people who understand that the universe is a much darker place than they've been led to believe, and who are willing to stand beside us when the lights go out." Holt pushed a data slate across the table. "This is the full dossier on the D'Hour. Everything we've learned in 87 years of war. It's not pretty reading." Rylan took the slate. He didn't look at it yet. "You're giving us access to your military intelligence, just like that. The SHIELD Compact doesn't work if its members are kept in the dark. You need to know what's out there. More importantly, you need to know what's coming." Rylan's claws tightened around the slate. "What's coming?" Holt's voice dropped, losing its diplomatic polish and becoming something closer to the tone Captain Voss used on her command deck. "The D'Hour swarm we've been fighting is not the main body. It's a scouting tendril, a forward probe. The true swarm, the deep swarm, is still out there, moving between galaxies. Our best models suggest it will reach the Orion Arm in approximately 22 years. When it does, every species in this council will be fighting for survival whether they want to or not." 22 years. In the lifespan of a Velari, that was a single tour of duty. In the lifespan of a species, it was a heartbeat. Rylan's crest flattened. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because the council needs a military leader who understands the stakes, and you just spent the last day learning exactly how wrong your assumptions can be. You're intelligent, you're respected, and you're humble enough now to listen. I want you to co-chair the SHIELD Compact's Defense Planning Committee." The offer hit Rylan like a physical force. Co-chair, not subordinate, not liaison, co-leader of humanity's strategic military framework. After everything his people had planned, after the arrogance and the threats and the near-catastrophic misjudgment, this human was offering him a place at the table, not as a concession, as a necessity. "You trust me with that?" Rylan asked. "I trust what you've learned," Holt said, "and I trust what you're going to do with it." The senior speaker sat motionless for a long moment. Outside the suite's viewport, the Titan hung against the starfield, its running lights pulsing in that steady, reassuring rhythm. The ship had not fired a single weapon since returning from Veltorak. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough. Finally, Rylan raised his head. His crest lifted not in defiance, but in something that looked, to Holt's practiced eye, remarkably like hope. "I accept," Rylan said, "on behalf of the Velari people, and I will personally ensure that the pacification fleet plans are destroyed and the officers who drafted them are reassigned to joint training operations with Terran forces. They need to see what real warriors look like." Holt allowed himself a small smile. "I think that can be arranged. Captain Voss runs a very educational training program." In the orbital yards above the Council world, construction had already begun on the first stellar forge installation. Human engineers in vac suits worked alongside Thelvian technicians who still wept occasionally at the beauty of the physics involved. The forge's pilot light, a pinprick of contained fusion that could power an entire continent, glowed steady and warm against the darkness. The Council had not yet voted on humanity's membership petition, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The motion that would be put forward in the morning session was not for associate membership. It was for full integration into the SHIELD Compact, with Earth as a founding pillar. And outside, in the vast silence between stars, the Titan kept watch. The Council's vote was unanimous. 63 species, representing trillions of sentient beings, cast their support for full integration into the SHIELD Compact. The formal signing ceremony was scheduled for the following week, but the real work began immediately. Joint command structures were drafted. Resource-sharing agreements were negotiated. The Titan-class warships, all 12 of them, were assigned sector patrol routes that would bring them within defensive range of every major population center in known space. Captain Myra Voss received the new deployment orders with the same unruffled calm she brought to everything. The Titan would remain in the Council's home system for an additional 30 days to serve as a training platform for the first wave of integrated crews. After that, it would rotate to the Orion Gap perimeter to resume its primary mission, holding the line against the D'Hour. The morning after the vote, Voss stood in the Titan's primary hangar bay, watching a mixed group of Velari, Thelvian, and human technicians swarm over a captured D'Hour bioship fragment. The fragment was inert, its organic systems neutralized by the sheer cannon strike that had severed it from its command form, but it was still the most valuable piece of xenobiological intelligence the Compact had ever acquired. One of the Thelvian scientists, the same elderly researcher who had wept at the Stellar Forge's unveiling, approached Voss with a data pad clutched in 4 of his 6 hands. "Captain, I've completed the preliminary analysis of the bioship's neural tissue," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of excitement and dread. "The D'Hour are not a natural species. They were engineered, designed as a weapon by something else, something older. The genetic markers suggest the original architects were extragalactic, possibly intergalactic." Voss took the data pad and scanned the findings. Her expression didn't change, but a muscle in her jaw tightened. "Are you telling me the D'Hour are someone's abandoned bioweapon project?" "That is the most plausible interpretation. They've been replicating and evolving autonomously for at least 2 million years, but their core programming, consume, adapt, expand, remains intact. Whoever built them is likely long gone. Or," the Thelvian hesitated. "Or waiting," Voss finished, "to see what happens." "Yes." Voss handed the data pad back. "Send this to Admiralty Command on Earth. Flag it for the Intelligence Directorate and the Compact's Joint Strategic Council. If there's something behind the D'Hour, we need to know about it before it knows about us." The Thelvian nodded and scurried off. Voss stood alone for a moment, surrounded by the muted roar of the hangar's environmental systems, and allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had just learned. The war humanity had been fighting for 87 years was not a war against a natural enemy. It was a cleanup operation, someone else's mistake, someone else's abandoned atrocity. And if the architects were still out there, watching. She pushed the thought aside. That was a problem for another day. Today she had a training exercise to oversee. The exercise was scheduled in the system's outer belt, far enough from the Council world to avoid civilian panic. 3 Velari cruisers, retrofitted with the first generation of Compact standard weapon systems, faced off against the Titan in a simulated engagement. The goal was not to win. No one expected cruisers to defeat a Titan-class vessel, but to learn. To practice coordination, communication, and the kind of rapid tactical adaptation that real combat against the D'Hour demanded. Voss commanded the Titan from her bridge, but she let her executive officer handle most of the tactical decisions. Her attention was split between the exercise and the deep space telemetry feed that ran constantly in the corner of her display. Old habits. The Orion Gap was quiet today, but quiet didn't mean safe. The cruisers performed well. Their captains had clearly studied the Veltarek engagement footage. They avoided the obvious mistakes, kept their formations loose, and used the system's asteroid field as cover for flanking maneuvers that would have been genuinely dangerous against a lesser opponent. The Titan countered each move with mechanical precision, disabling the cruisers' simulated weapons without destroying their simulated hulls. At the exercise's conclusion, Voss opened a channel to the cruiser captains. "Good work, all of you. You lasted 6 minutes longer than I expected. Implement the after-action recommendations my tactical team is sending you, and you'll be ready for live-fire drills within the month." The Velari captains acknowledged with crisp salutes. The condescension that had colored their species, interactions with humans only days earlier, was gone, replaced by the hard-earned respect of soldiers who had been given a glimpse of the standard they were expected to meet. Later that evening, ship's evening, marked by the dimming of corridor lights and the shift to night cycle watches, Voss found herself in the Titan's observation lounge. The lounge was a long, narrow compartment with a curved viewport that ran the length of one wall, offering an uninterrupted view of the stars. It was empty except for Adrian Holt, who sat in one of the cushioned chairs with a cup of something steaming in his hands. "Mind if I join you?" Voss asked. Holt gestured to the chair beside him. "Please, I could use the company. Diplomacy is exhausting." Voss sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The stars wheeled slowly as the Titan maintained its orbital position, and somewhere below them, on the Council world, billions of beings were going about their lives with the newfound knowledge that they were not alone in the dark, and that the company they kept was fiercer than they had ever imagined. "I read the Thelvian report," Holt said eventually. "The Dehu are being engineered. That changes things." "It changes everything," Voss agreed. "If the architects are still out there, we're not just fighting a war, we're fighting someone else's mess." "Do you think they're still out there?" Voss considered the question. The stars offered no answers. "I think if they are, they're about to find out that the cleanup crew has teeth." Holt smiled, a tired, genuine expression that softened the lines around his eyes. "That's very HFY of you, Captain." "It's not a slogan, it's a mission statement." They sat together in the quiet, two humans on a ship of unimaginable power, looking out at a galaxy that was only beginning to understand what their species truly was. Behind them, the Titan hummed with the quiet energy of 1,000 systems running in perfect harmony. Ahead of them, the future waited, darker and more complicated than anyone had guessed, but not unwinnable. Not unwinnable. The signing ceremony filled the council chamber to capacity and beyond. Overflow crowds gathered in the capital's public plazas, watching on massive projection screens as the compact charter was formally ratified. Delegates from 63 species lined the central aisle, each bearing a physical copy of the charter bound in materials native to their homeworlds. The documents would be archived in the Titan's vault as a symbolic gesture. The ship that had first appeared as a threat would now carry the promise of unity. Adrian Holt stood at the head of the assembly, representing Earth. He wore the same simple gray uniform he had worn on the day the Titan arrived. No medals, no braid, just the quiet confidence of a man whose species had finally found its place in the galaxy, not through conquest, but through the deliberate, daily choice to be something better. Senior Speaker Ryland stood opposite him, representing the council. His copper scales had been polished to a high sheen, and his crest was raised in the formal posture of celebration. The charter rested on a pedestal between them, its text illuminated by a single beam of light. "We gather today," Ryland began, his voice carrying through the chamber and out into the plazas beyond, "to correct an error. Many errors, if I am honest. We looked at humanity and saw weakness. We looked at their ships of peace and assumed they had no ships of war. We were wrong, profoundly, dangerously wrong, but humanity did not punish us for our error. They taught us. They showed us that strength is not the capacity to destroy, it is the capacity to protect, and they offered us a place at their side." He paused, turning to face Holt directly. "Ambassador, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I offer not just membership but partnership, not just alliance but friendship. The Shield Compact is more than a military agreement. It is a declaration that we will face the darkness together, as equals, with the same courage your people have shown for a century in silence." Holt stepped forward and placed his hand on the charter. The gesture was mirrored by Ryland, whose claws rested delicately beside Holt's fingers. "Humanity accepts," Holt said. "Not as saviors, not as overlords, but as friends. We've been alone in the dark for a long time. We're ready to share the light." The chamber erupted, not in the polite, restrained applause of diplomatic protocol, but in the raw, emotional outpouring of beings who had just realized they were no longer facing an indifferent universe on their own. The Thelvian delegation sang, a haunting, polyphonic harmony that had not been performed in public for 3 centuries. The Velari stamped their feet in a martial rhythm that shook the floor. Even the stoic, crystalline Hreenir allowed their light patterns to pulse with something that looked unmistakably like joy. Outside in orbit, the Titan responded. Its running lights shifted from steady white to a slow, pulsing gold, the color humans associated with dawn, with new beginnings. The ship's AI, a quiet presence that rarely spoke, transmitted a single message to every compact vessel within range. "The shield is raised." Captain Myra Voss watched the ceremony from her command deck. She had been invited to attend in person, but she preferred to be on her ship. The Titan was more than a vessel to her. It was a trust, a responsibility. The 12 Titan-class warships were the most powerful weapons humanity had ever built, and they were commanded by people who understood that power was not a license. Her communications officer looked up from her station. "Captain, we're receiving a signal from the Orion Gap perimeter. Deep space telemetry. It's faint, but it's there." Voss straightened. "Show me." The signal resolved on the main display, a ghostly, fragmented transmission that had been traveling for decades. It was D'Huer. It wasn't any known language or code, but its structure was unmistakably artificial, intelligent, deliberate. "Origin?" Voss asked. "Uncertain. The signal been degrading for at least 50,000 years, but the trajectory suggests an extragalactic source, maybe intergalactic." The officer hesitated. "Captain, if the Thelvian analysis is correct about the D'Huer being engineered." "Then someone just said hello," Voss finished. She stared at the signal for a long moment. It would take months to decode, years to understand, and whatever it said, it would change everything. Again. But that was a problem for another day. Today, the compact was signed. Today, 63 species had chosen to stand together. Today, the shield was raised. Voss allowed herself a small smile. "Log the signal, priority clearance to Admiralty Command, and send a message to Ambassador Holt. Tell him to enjoy the ceremony. The deep dark can wait one more day." Down on the planet, the celebration continued. Holt stood at the edge of the chamber, watching species that had once regarded humanity with pity or contempt, now laughing and talking and planning a shared future. Rylan approached him, 2 glasses of something amber-colored in his hands. He offered one to Holt. "I almost made the worst mistake of my career," Rylan said. "Of my life, if your ship had arrived one day later." "But it didn't," Holt said, "and you didn't. You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. It's the hardest thing there is, admitting you were wrong and choosing to be better. You did both. That counts for more than you know." Rylan raised his glass. "To better choices." Holt clinked his glass against Rylan's. "To the shield compact." They drank. Above them, visible through the chamber's observation dome, the Titan hung in the sky, golden lights pulsing, engines dark, hull gleaming with the reflected light of a star that had watched over this world for 4 billion years. It was no longer a warship that inspired fear. It was a guardian that inspired hope. And somewhere far beyond the edge of the galaxy, a 50,000-year-old signal whispered through the void, carrying a message that would one day demand an answer. Humanity would be ready when it arrived. They always were. The Titan's lights glowed steady and sure against the endless night. The shield was raised. The galaxy was watching. And humanity, patient, dangerous, compassionate humanity, had only just begun.